Most people get a good morning text from their mom, or a meme, or at least a passive-aggressive chain message about gratitude. But me? I woke up on Sunday to my mother demanding $2,000 like she was billing me for existing. No, hi, how are you? No, I'm sorry for draining your college fund. Just this. I need you to send $2,000 for Becca's dorm deposit. I sat in bed, staring at my phone like it had sprouted fangs. Becca, my 17-year-old stepsister, needed a private dorm room. Because apparently, sharing a bathroom with another human is beneath her delicate sensibilities. This is the same girl who once threw a meltdown because her milkshake was too foamy. Let me back up. When I was 16, my mom married Hank Whitaker. Hank had all the warmth of a DMV line. He came with 2 kids, Cody, the golden child who could do no wrong, and Becca, the fragile flower. From the second they moved in, it was like someone flipped a switch in my mom's brain. She stopped being my parent and became their full-time hype squad. Suddenly, she didn't have time for my track meets or my birthday. The woman who used to call me her sunshine started acting like I was an inconvenient house guest. The final straw came after graduation when my grandparents, bless them, handed me a $22,000 check. They called it my fresh start. I called it my lifeline. I saved every penny, picked up a part-time job, and scraped together another $4,000. That money was supposed to be my ticket out. Tuition, rent, food, freedom. And then it disappeared. I still remember the day I logged into my bank account and saw a fat, red $0. For a second, I thought there had to be some glitch, or maybe I'd accidentally bought a private island. But no. When I called my mom, she didn't even pretend to be sorry. I took it, she said, her voice all cool and detached. You've been disrespectful. You needed consequences. As if that made it reasonable to steal $26,000 from her own kid. She even tried to make me feel guilty for not worshiping Hank and his perfect offspring. That was the day I packed a bag, walked out, and moved in with my grandparents. The only people who didn't treat me like an ungrateful charity case. Since then, my mother and I hadn't spoken. No birthday calls. No Christmas texts. No apology. Nothing. And honestly, it was peaceful. Until this text landed like a dead pigeon in my lap. Apparently, Becca needed a private dorm. Because heaven forbid she learns what the rest of us already know, that sometimes you have to live with a roommate who eats tuna at 2 a.m. I stared at the message, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I wrote back. Absolutely not happening. She replied instantly. You can't say no to family. Sure I can. Watch me. I blocked her number, my hands shaking with a mix of relief and fury. For a second, I felt like maybe this would finally be the end. But people like my mother don't recognize boundaries. They just see them as inconveniences to bulldoze. Blocking my mom felt like slamming a door I should have closed years ago. I'd finally drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Like I'd peeled off some heavy, grimy coat I'd been wearing since I was 16. Of course, my optimism lasted exactly 3 days. That Friday, I was sprawled on my couch after a long shift, eating leftover pizza and reveling in my quiet little life, when my phone lit up again. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but some masochistic curiosity made me pick up. It was her. Hi, she said, all fake sweetness. Listen, I talked to Hank, and we came up with a solution. The way she said solution, you'd think she was about to read me the terms of a hostage negotiation. I didn't respond. I just let her continue, because why deny myself the comedic spectacle? She took a deep, dramatic breath. Becca needs her own space, and it's just so unfair to make her share a dorm. So we found her a 2-bedroom off-campus apartment. With her own bathroom, obviously. All you'd need to do is cover half of it. Just $1,000 a month. It's nothing for you now that you're doing so well. I almost dropped my pizza. $1,000 per month. For a teenager I hadn't seen since she posted a TikTok making fun of my old Honda. Mom, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, why would you think this is my responsibility? She launched straight into her monologue, as if she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. You've never contributed to this family, she began, in that disappointed tone she perfected over years of pretending I didn't exist. It's time you gave something back. You owe Becca. You owe all of us. I actually snorted, loud enough that she paused, probably to recalibrate her guilt missiles. Excuse me, I said, laughing despite the rage bubbling under my skin. I owe you? For what? For stealing my college fund? For ghosting me? For making me feel like a stray you forgot to let back in the house? Her voice got cold. You were living off your grandparents like a freeloader. We did everything for you, and you never appreciated it. Right? Because moving out at 18 after having my savings stolen was the very definition of freeloading. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to start yelling. Here's an idea, I said, my voice flat. When you pay me back the $26,000 you took, I'll think about your little dorm project. I could practically feel her eyes narrowing through the phone. You're selfish, she hissed. Ungrateful. I tried to offer you a better life, and you threw it in my face. A better life. That was rich. Like she hadn't spent the last 7 years pretending I was a stray dog she forgot to let back in the house. You didn't offer me anything, I said. You took from me. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I hung up before she could spit out another manipulative gem. My hands were shaking, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. It didn't feel like closure, more like round 2 of a never-ending fight. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped into paying for Becca's private bathroom or her essential oil diffuser. If Mom wanted to keep pretending I was her family when it was convenient, she could do it without my bank account. You'd think after hanging up on her, my mother would take the hint. That maybe she'd realize screaming at me wasn't the most effective negotiation tactic. But no, she was just warming up. The next day, I tried to decompress by walking to my favorite coffee shop. I'd barely taken my first sip of an overpriced latte when my phone buzzed with a text. It was practically an essay, dripping with martyrdom and misplaced superiority. I don't understand why you're acting like this. You've always been stubborn, but this is beyond hurtful. Becca deserves a chance at a decent college experience, and you're standing in the way. It's not about money, it's about family. Family. That word again. She tossed it around like it was some magic incantation that would erase everything she'd done. The woman had ignored me for years, but suddenly my wallet was the glue holding this family together. I read the message 3 times, and with each pass, my irritation climbed a notch. My stomach was in knots, but the absurdity almost made me laugh. They'd rewritten history so thoroughly that in her version, I was the villain who abandoned them, not the kid she kicked out emotionally and financially. I didn't reply. What was there to say that I hadn't already? That she'd left me with nothing, and now expected everything? By evening, my phone rang again. I stared at the screen-blocked number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Hey, this is Hank. Hearing his voice after so many years felt like a cold slap. The man who used to pretend I was invisible now apparently felt entitled to lecture me. He didn't waste time. Your mother says you've been extremely disrespectful. She's very upset. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to stay calm. Hank, with all due respect, this has nothing to do with you. He chuckled, low and humorless. It has everything to do with me. You don't get to abandon your family and pretend you're above helping. Abandon my family. Like I hadn't been the one left out in the cold. Remind me, I said slowly. When exactly did any of you care what happened to me? When Mom took my college fund? When she stopped showing up to my life? Or when you two decided I didn't exist? He ignored that. It's time to grow up. Becca needs you. She's your sister. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. She's not my sister. She's your daughter. And your responsibility. There was a long pause. Then his voice turned icy. You've always been ungrateful. We tried to give you a better life. Right. A better life where I was invisible, broke, and treated like a burden. I could have argued longer, but it wouldn't matter. These people weren't interested in hearing me. They were interested in extracting what they thought they were owed. I said, I don't owe you anything, and ended the call. The moment I hung up, relief flooded my chest like fresh air. But deep down, I knew they weren't going to stop. For people like them, no just means try harder. Sure enough, less than 24 hours later, Becca herself texted me. I hadn't heard from her since she was 12 and told me my car smelled like sadness. Now she was reaching out, her tone sugary sweet. Hi. I know things are tense, but I really need help with this dorm. It's only money, and you're doing well. Please. Only money. Only. I almost threw my phone across the room. There it was, the entitlement that never ended. They'd all convinced themselves I was some Scrooge McDuck sitting on a mountain of gold. In reality, I was still figuring out how to pay my rent, my student loans, and keep the lights on. But even if I'd won the lottery, I still wouldn't owe them a cent. I deleted the message without replying and blocked her number too. When I finally set the phone down, I felt something that almost surprised me, like the last thread tying me to their chaos had finally snapped. I sat there in my quiet living room, and for once, it felt like enough. I was naive enough to think that blocking all their numbers would finally give me some peace. that maybe I'd get a few weeks to breathe before the next guilt trip or ultimatum. But in my family, persistence is basically a competitive sport. It was a Wednesday evening. I'd just come back from work and was juggling groceries when I noticed a figure standing by the entrance to my building. At first, I thought maybe it was someone waiting for an Uber. Then she turned around. My mom. There she was, arms folded across her chest, wearing the same "you've disappointed me" expression she perfected years ago. For a split second, my heart thudded against my ribs so hard it hurt. Part of me wanted to drop the groceries and sprint upstairs, but I was too tired to run from her anymore. She didn't even let me get my keys out. "We need to talk," she announced, like she was about to deliver a lecture to an unruly middle schooler. "About what?" I asked, flatly. "Because if this is about money, you're wasting your gas." Her face twisted like I'd spit on her shoes. "I didn't raise you to be so disrespectful." "Respect is earned," I said, my voice low. "And you lost mine when you emptied my bank account." Her mouth opened and closed, a silent goldfish in a cardigan. For a second, I thought she might finally see how absurd this was. But no, she doubled down. "Becca deserves better," she snapped. "You're doing well now. You can afford to help." That was it. My patience finally snapped in two. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice climbing despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You took everything I'd saved for college. You made me feel like I didn't matter. And now you think I'm going to bail out your precious Becca? The girl who didn't even say hi the last time she saw me." She looked genuinely offended, like I just told her Santa wasn't real. "You've always been selfish," she hissed. "I tried to give you a better life, and you threw it all back in my face." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so ridiculous, it felt like I'd been dropped into some off-brand soap opera. "A better life?" I repeated. "You mean the one where I was invisible? The one where my only value was the money you could squeeze out of me?" Her eyes narrowed. "You owe this family." Something inside me went very still. I'd spent years letting her define my worth. Years letting her convince me that I was the problem. That if I just tried harder, been quieter, more accommodating, maybe she'd have loved me the way she loved Hank's kids. I set the grocery bags down on the sidewalk. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I don't owe you a damn thing." I turned to walk away. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "You can't just walk away from us," she spat. I pulled free, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Watch me." Then I walked past her, into my building, and shut the door behind me. My legs were shaking, but I didn't care. Maybe she'd stand out there all night rehearsing new ways to twist the truth. Maybe she'd find some fresh angle to make herself the victim. But this time, she was the one left standing in the cold. Upstairs in my apartment, I set the groceries on the counter and leaned against the wall, letting my heart beat slow. The old guilt tried to creep in. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was ungrateful. But another part of me knew better. I hadn't abandoned my family. They'd abandoned me a long time ago. I just finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. After that showdown on the sidewalk, I figured even my mom would need a little time to lick her wounds. Maybe she'd take a week to process the fact that I wasn't going to be her personal ATM anymore. But clearly, I'd overestimated her capacity for introspection. 3 days later, my phone buzzed while I was at lunch with my friend Marcus. He glanced at the screen and arched an eyebrow. "Another unsolicited guilt trip?" he asked, deadpan. I sighed. "Probably. But it wasn't my mom this time. It was my aunt, Sharon, Mom's older sister, who always tried to play the peacemaker, usually by telling me to just hear your mother out." Her text read, "Hey, your mom is really upset. She feels like you've cut her off and refuses to let her explain. Maybe you could have a calm conversation? She's family." Family. That word again, rolled out like a tired mantra that was supposed to dissolve all sins. Marcus watched me reread the message, my face heating up. "You okay?" he asked. I showed him the phone. "Do I look like someone who wants to have a calm conversation?" He shook his head. "You look like someone who's about to throw that phone into the soup." It wasn't even that Sharon meant harm. She was just willfully clueless. She thought if everyone would just sit down over tea, this would magically be resolved. As if my mother's behavior was a little spat instead of years of entitlement and neglect. I typed back, "Sharon, I appreciate you trying, but this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern, and I'm done with it." She responded almost immediately, "I just think you'll regret shutting your family out." I didn't bother replying. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let other people think you're the villain. But that wasn't even the finale. Because, of course, my mom wasn't about to let Sharon have the last word. That evening, I came home to find an envelope wedged in my doorframe. No return address. Just my name written in big, loopy letters. I felt my stomach drop. Inside was a letter, 2 full pages of her telling me how she couldn't believe I'd become so cold. How I'd betrayed the family by refusing to help Becca. And in case I hadn't already received the message, she included a lovely little line. "You've always been so selfish. I don't know who you've become." I sat down on my couch, the letter crumpling in my hand. And for a second, just one stupid second, I felt a pang of guilt. Like maybe I really had turned into some cold, unfeeling person. But then I remembered the look on her face the day she told me she'd emptied my account. The way she hadn't hesitated to cut me off when Hank and his kids became her priority. The way she'd only resurfaced when she needed money. That wasn't family. That was exploitation dressed up in family vocabulary. I folded the letter, set it on the coffee table, and left it there like the artifact it was. A relic of a relationship that had already rotted from the inside out. If she wanted to keep playing this game, she could do it without me. And in that moment, I felt something almost like relief. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I finally accepted it never would be. A week passed with no calls, no texts, no letters. For a moment, I started to believe maybe, just maybe, she'd finally run out of ways to claw back into my life. Then the certified mail arrived. I got home from work to find the envelope sitting on my kitchen counter, courtesy of my landlord who'd signed for it. The return address was a law office I'd never heard of. My stomach did a slow, queasy flip. I opened it with trembling hands, half expecting some absurd lawsuit. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. A legal document formally requesting I contribute to Becca's college expenses as part of my familial obligations. The lawyer had carefully worded it in soft, almost polite language, but the gist was clear. I was being threatened with legal action if I didn't pay. I read the letter 3 times, my eyes burning hotter each time. Because it wasn't enough for my mom to scream or guilt trip or show up unannounced, now she was trying to drag me into court over her own entitled decisions. I sat down at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, and I laughed. The kind of laugh that isn't really laughter at all. The hollow, exhausted sound you make when you finally realize a situation is beyond parody. They'd always treated me like the backup plan, the piggy bank, the expendable kid. And now, they were putting that in writing. I called my grandparents first. My grandmother was silent for a moment after I explained what had happened. Then she said, in her gentle, steel-edged way, "She's lost her mind." Grandpa was less polite. "Over my dead body," he growled. "You are not paying a dime to those people." They put me in touch with a family lawyer they trusted, who, after reading the paperwork, nearly laughed out loud on the phone. "They have no case," he said. "They can send you 100 letters like this, but they have zero legal ground to stand on. You don't owe them anything." A week later, he sent an official response on my behalf, spelling out in careful lawyer speak that I would not be participating in their circus. When I signed the letter, my hands weren't shaking this time. And then, nothing. No calls. No texts. No more letters. It was like they'd finally realized their performance wasn't going to get them what they wanted. Or maybe they'd just moved on to their next mark. I didn't care. For once, their silence wasn't ominous, it was a gift. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant, like I'd conquered something huge. But mostly, I just felt tired. Like I'd been swimming against a current for so long that I forgot what it felt like to just float. The quiet stretched on, and I filled it with things that actually mattered. Late-night walks with Marcus, movie nights with my grandparents, mornings where I could drink my coffee without checking my phone in dread. I even started therapy, which I probably should have done years ago. My therapist told me something that stuck. Sometimes, cutting contact isn't the failure of a relationship. It's the clearest sign you finally see it for what it was. She was right. Because the truth was, I hadn't lost my family when I stopped answering. I'd lost them years before, when they decided I was nothing but a resource to tap. The only difference now was that I finally had the nerve to say it out loud. Last week, I cleaned out the little box where I'd been stuffing their letters and printouts of their messages. I thought maybe I'd burn them or do something dramatic. Instead, I put them through my cheap shredder and watched them disappear in a satisfying confetti of cheap paper. It wasn't closure exactly. It was just done. And sometimes, that's the best you can ask for. I don't know if they'll ever try to contact me again. But I do know one thing. If they do, there's nothing left to say. And that feels like freedom worth protecting.